Okay, fantastic. So Sammy and Alex, I will pass it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Um, we're going to introduce our three great panelists. Play the vid. Yes, let's play the video. Can we play the video, Sarah? Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. First, I just want to say thank you, everyone, on behalf of Alex and myself, for having us here and allowing us to MC today's panel. We have three great speakers, Mehdi, Naziha, and Kala. Today's going to be a great conversation on disturbing public spaces. And so I'll be introducing everyone that's here. First, starting off with Mehdi. Mehdi is a development manager at Toronto Community Housing Corporation. He oversees the revitalization of the Regent Park project in its varying phases. He is also the co-founder of Muslims in Public Spaces, MIPS for short. He works at the intersection of public space, art, and Muslim identities. Mehdi's work, sorry, Mehdi works explores the intersection of urban planning, equity, and public space and design, with a strong commitment to amplifying marginalized voices in city building. So, round of applause to Mehdi. Thank you for being here. Up next is Naziha. Naziha is a recent graduate from the Masters of Science in Planning program at the University of Toronto. She is passionate about community development, placemaking, and multicultural planning for diverse community. Her research focuses on creating inclusive public spaces, including prayer and multi-faith rooms, whether that's in parks, malls, and institutional buildings for the Toronto Muslim community. Beyond her professional work, she's a coffee enthusiast and an avid baker, with tiramisu being one of her signature dishes. Round of applause for Nazia. Welcome, welcome. Up next is Kala Lee. Did I say your name right, Kala? Okay, we're great. All right. Kala is an interdisciplinary designer, researcher, and a visual communicator who uses the intersection of art and data to explore how people and systems intersect with one another. Her work centers around art, culture, community, entrepreneurship, and the connective space that links us. Through co-design and collaboration, she creates proactive conversations and spaces that engage curiosity and catalyzes systematic change. Kala is a co-founder of Method Collective and Space for Grief, alongside Zain Hussein and Fran Cointreau Rawlings. Round of applause for Kala and everyone on the panel. Thank you for being here, and we're excited for this conversation. I'll be now passing it on to Alex, my co-host, to start asking the questions.
Mhm. Awesome. Really excited for the conversation today. So let's start us off with some fun questions. So one of the core themes of today's discussion is exploring belonging in public space. But before we dive in, we had a brief introduction to each of you, but can you give us really briefly a quick snapshot of the different organizations that you're a part of, and as well the communities that they're aiming to serve, just to set the stage for everyone listening. And whoever wants to start, go for it. Don't be shy.
Okay, I'll go for it then. So hi everyone. First of all, thank you so much for including me in this panel, and I want to thank everybody here. I'm overall really excited for the next hour because not only do I get to speak more about the work that Muslims in Public Space does, but also learn from a lot of people who I deeply admire. So Muslims in Public Space, we began in 2021, just after COVID, really looking into serving kind of the Muslim community in Toronto and the GTA and getting them more involved in the planning process. So what we do is, Sammy mentioned earlier, we work at the intersection of public space, art and Muslim identities. And what that looks like concretely is doing different kind of public space intervention work, doing workshops about the planning process, teaching folks within the Muslim community about exclusionary zoning, but ultimately getting folks, I think, more involved with the planning process so then they can be part of city building. And I think throughout the next hour, we'll talk about the different projects that we're involved with.
Awesome. Thank you. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. Hi, I'm Kala. I'm one of 3 co-founders of Space for Grief, along with Zayon Hussein and Frank Quintero Rawlings. Space for Grief really arose from a few kind of intersections of not just our work, but also some of our research. Fran had done some of her research in death, dying, and grief rituals. And then when the 3 of us came together and started working together, we kept seeing grief come up in multiple spaces, in disciplines and industries, and it kind of felt relentless in many ways. And what it really told us is that grief isn't just about death and dying. It's actually about loss and transition, and how much we've lost a lot of that human connection and relationality in our systems, between people, between spaces, and with our land and environment as well. So Space for Grief it's a public art installation that really seeks to provide not just a physical space for people to come together and be in community over grief, but allows us to also process it collectively, and from there be able to reimagine our futures as well. So it really is about reconciling our past in order to not carry on that grief and trauma into our future decisions, but allow us to accept, release, and also process to be able to think forward as well.
It's really powerful.
Thank you.
Go for it, Nazia.
Okay, before I get started, I just wanted to say a big thank you, and I'm so excited to be a part of this, especially to Jane's Walk, to Mahdi. Mahdi's also one of the co-chairs, Cassandra as well, and being able to work so closely with everyone. And this is a really, like, not only am I grateful to be here, but a big full circle moment, because to be able to have Sammy and Alex as hosts for the podcast. Fun fact, we all went to graduate school together, and to see how far along they've come with untitled planning, and as well as these conversations, which we would have in like the back of our office like rooms, and we would just be talking about this, and now to talk about this in a much bigger audience, and to be able to have creating impact and change. I'm so proud of all of us, and my 2 friends. I'm so happy to be here with all of you too. So to tell everybody a little bit about Plaza Pops, so my name is Naziha. I am the program director of Plaza Pops, and what we are is we are a collaborative and community-based approach where we take privately owned strip mall parking lots and turn them into community gathering spaces. And we operate within the strip mall main streets of Toronto, a term which you will hear me use a lot, and I'll define it later on. And we work within Toronto's inner suburbs, particularly in the neighborhood of Scarborough, where I'm from. I'm from Wexford Heights. If anybody's from Scarborough, shout out to Scarborough. We have the best food ever. And we also work with other inner suburban neighborhoods, including Etobicoke as well. And so the work that we've done is originally started in 2019, where we applied for the Park People Incubator Grant, and we've been doing this for 5 years. And it's just so amazing to be here. And we work with a number of stakeholders, including the city, our Wexford Heights BIA, and as well as a number of other stakeholders, including private landowners, community researchers, and so many people to kind of make our installations all come to life, and create and celebrate local culture and community. So yeah, super excited to be here.
Awesome. A full circle moment indeed. But this brings me to my next question, which is about belonging. So what does belonging in the city look like for you and your community? And anyone can go first, whoever's feeling it the most. Go for it.
Sure, I guess I'll start. And I also would recommend my fellow panelists maybe to unmute ourselves as well too, because I think I've done a few of these now, and I think you get the best dialogue and conversation when we're all unmuted, and it feels more like a natural conversation. So I'll put that up there. What does belonging mean? I think it's a huge question, something that I think that I've tackled with not just in my personal self, but also in my professional work as well too, what we do with MIPS. And maybe I'll start off with the personal stuff. I think for me, growing up in kind of an inner city neighborhood in Regent Park and going through revitalization, seeing how revitalization and urban change was affecting my neighborhood, I think belonging to me meant that being involved in that process, that being not just a participant, but an actual partner in that process. So from a personal level, I've taken it further professionally with Muslims in public space because I say the importance of belonging means that Jane Jacobs talks about this all the time, right? Cities are the best cities when they're kind of designed by everybody, but that means everybody has to feel they belong and participate in it. And when we started Muslims in Public Space, I think what we recognized was that there's certainly a gap, in the mainstream planning process, that a lot of folks don't necessarily feel belong. They don't feel that their ideas are being heard. They don't feel that when neighborhood and urban change is happening, that they can participate. So when we started with MIPS, our goal was kind of twofold. One, get folks who have been historically not part of the planning process, Muslim, a lot of folks, racialized folks, get them to learn more about the planning process and what does zoning mean? What does a development sign in the neighborhood mean for outcomes like community benefits? And then the second part of it is how do you actively change and ensure that the outcome is something that you feel a sense of belonging, right? And obviously super important when we talk about cities and we talk about spaces we go to, we want to feel belonging. When you and I go to a public park, we want that sense of feeling visible and feeling seen. So one of the projects that we done was create this Islamic geometric shape in a basketball court a few years ago. And the reason why we did it was Islamic geometric shapes are super cool. And a lot of us had a great interest of kind of learning what these shapes are and teaching folks who perhaps never knew what they were about. But also B, I say is a lot of folks who came to that event said, wow, this is so cool. Like a lot of young people, and Nazia was actually there as well too, said that, wow, this is so cool that in a neighborhood that has predominantly Muslim people in Thorncliffe can have a park that has either motifs, public spaces, design elements that look more like them.
Yeah, I can definitely continue from what Mahdi said. Like a lot of the things which Mahdi mentioned, I relate to quite a lot. And I think for me, a sense of belonging is, especially myself. I wasn't born and raised in Canada. I was an immigrant here, and so I was born and raised in Bangladesh. And so when you're here, especially like majority of Canadians who are newcomers, it's like the sense of like, is this home? Or like, how do I balance between my own ethnicity, my identity, and as well as this new life that I'm transitioning into here? And I think for myself, that sense of belonging really came in when I started like thinking about these things further and deeper within graduate school. And I would always think like, you know, what does it mean to be someone who is trying to embrace both their Canadian identity and as well as their identity of being from another place and mixing it together. And what's really interesting about our city, we say like diversity is our motto and we encourage that. And I think that sense of belonging really truly comes in when you see your identity being reflected within the public spaces you're in. And so I think this is where coming from Scarborough, we take a big pride in that because being from the suburbs, personally, we don't have the most affordable housing. We don't have accessible transit, and we don't have enough public space, or even the public space, the greenery that we do have, they're all either ravines or near the hydro corridors, which are inaccessible. So it's like we're always pushed to the side. And I felt that the most, especially when I was learning about cities, it was always about the downtown core. I had no idea that my neighborhood, being from Wexford Heights, being in a suburb was something even to talk about, because it's like you live in a suburb. And I think that is where I really started to kind of see the importance and value of like, what does the sense of belonging mean? So for me, and I think for us at Plaza Pops, one of the things that we tried to create this year with our program programming, and as well as our installations, is the sense of home. The sense of when you're in the city and when you're in these strip malls, they're much more than just plazas. Yes, they're initially designed for the car, especially in a post-war era and industrialization and Fordism and etc. But they've changed over time, where a majority of these strip malls in Wexford Heights alongside Lawrence, they're actually owned by immigrants themselves, many from the Middle East, many from Southeast Asia, from East Africa, and they've changed over time to being these cultural landmarks and these hubs of the sense of belonging, where it's really normal if you wanted to, for example, make something traditional at home, that specific ingredient you need, whether it's biryani or maklube or anything else. You can't get that in Walmart. You don't get that in Shoppers Drug Mart. We get that in like your local like strip mall grocery store whose uncle you know, and you just have a conversation and you say hi and they talk about you and then you just go home. It's that sense of creativity and that sense of like, oh wow, like you're like me, we can bring our culture here. And I think that's one of the things we wanted to do, is like we wanted to embrace that identity that our communities have, especially alongside Scarborough, and give them that space through social infrastructure, because we're already empowered. We do belong. This is our city, and we belong through many ways, through our identities, our ethnicities, our languages, our religions, and we already have this culture that's empowered. We just need the social infrastructure for it, and I think that's what we do.
I really love the examples that both Mehdi and Nizzi have given, because it really talks about how something that we talk or that we feel a lot at Space for Grief, and it's actually that you feel belonging before you can talk about it, before you can understand what truly makes you feel belonging. Belonging is an embodied sense. We see it with our eyes, with like motifs around us. We see it with we sense it and feel it with the smell of food that is home to us. And then we also feel it in how we sense time as well. Do we feel like we are cared for here? Do we feel like we have memory here? Do we feel like we have safety here? And all of those little pieces are what really make that, I think, in creating that sense of belonging. I know that for me, I feel exactly that. When I smell like certain foods in Chinatown, I know I belong here. I know that that I can ask for certain things and know that I'm actually going to get cared for that. So and for us at Space for Grief, we really see it in that grief is generally seen as an inconvenience and unproductive, and it's usually tucked away from public spaces. You're not allowed to grieve in public. You're not allowed to express how you feel in public. So grief can be so lonely. So us being able to create public space where people can have those feelings, have that sense of community, there is a belonging that creates that you sense the minute you kind of walk in, through the sound, the music, the smell of, we use smell kind of like in trying to bring in the smell of soil and dirt that really calms our senses as well. So it's to us, all of those senses bring back this collective and community memory that before you can talk about it, you feel it already.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to unpack there. So I'm excited for the next round of questions that we have. So I'll pass it off to Sammy to carry us through.
Yeah, the three of you have touched on very important points and very beautifully as well. A part of the experience, but also reflecting a little bit on the importance of action and activities. And so kind of thinking about some elements of resistance right now, just to help us understand what has been done in some of the experiences you've been a part of. And so kind of the first question just being, what forms of resistance have you seen or been a part of within the communities you've worked with or cities that you've worked with?
I can get started, Sammy. I think for us, in terms of resistance, I think existing in and of itself is a form of resistance, because who this city was designed for is very different than who lives here, than the majority of us who lives here. And I think for us, especially within the context of strip malls in general, and this idea of, I guess the term we say is ambiguous public space, because these majority of these strip malls and strip mall main streets, we define them as like these commercial plazas that are lined by the arterial roads, the main roads, and which many of them partially they're called POPs because they're privately owned public spaces, and also POPs and hence Plaza POPs, right? And when you're in these privately owned public spaces, much of it is public facing, but it's privately owned. So when somebody who is within these spaces, you don't know if like, hey, can I be here? Can I not be here? But what's really cool that we've seen throughout the last 5 years within strip malls, especially along Lawrence, it's that the people who are here are actually these elderly immigrant uncles who are either the store owners or even just people walking by, and they just carry and bring out their chairs, and them existing in that place, they've just their existence in and of itself and their gathering is something that is, I think, so profound, because many cities outside of the global north and western cities, if you look at the global south, or if you look at Europe or East Africa or even the Middle East, we have this concept of open space and open streets. Hence why we have Open Streets TO. Like when it comes, we have all of these amazing initiatives, and I think it's inspired by the fact that as human beings, we love being outside. We love to just sit outside, look at the lawn, see what's happening, and I guess it kind of also relates to this concept of Eyes on the Street by Jane Jacobs. And so one of the things that I see as resistance are these Somali uncles who kind of inspired our installations to come to life, because they're just sitting there, they're literally leaning back, they bring their own lawn chairs. And I don't just see this in our particular plaza, I see this everywhere in Scarborough. It's like something normal. Like they'll bring their chairs, they'll sip tea, they'll look at they'll look at traffic, and they'll complain about politics. Like it's like a culture that we are bringing outside, but here within a North American context, it's seen as like, we have policies of loitering. Why are you loitering? Or like, don't sit here. Or even the way we design our benches, they're inaccessible. Now we have the pole style. Like, so these are, I guess, like indirect forms through which we're trying to prevent people coming out into public space and seeing people embracing who they are. And I think one of the other things that I've seen just personally from my own personal experience. Sorry, Matt, do you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Feel free to jump in anytime. And I think one of my own like personal experiences, for me, my personal form of resistance that I've seen is praying in public space, because I pray in public space, and it is very difficult, let me tell you, because people are always looking at you, people are staring at you, and even our Somali uncles too. People walk by and they're like, who are these people? Like, do they belong here? And you're in private space in that instance. And for myself, even when I'm praying, even in public space, it's like people just stare at you. And I think those things existing and doing the things that are rooted in your values and your tradition and trying to embrace your own culture, that's also a form of resistance. So yeah.
I feel that sort of existence as resistance so truly, because we feel exactly that at Space for Grief, when we have people visibly crying in public and sort of showing that expression. That existence is in some ways it's been an invitation for others to actually come and share that time and space. We've seen strangers kind of come together just to comfort each other, which is super, super lovely, because there are times where you've seen someone crying in public and people just ignore them. They just walk right past. But something as small as handing someone a tissue or just an acknowledgement, like a quick glance of acknowledgement, it can mean so much to say that it's fine what you're doing. Feel what you're feeling. Everyone goes through it. We saw that also someone had come to Space for Grief to watch the live stream of their father's funeral, because they said they had nowhere else to go. And just having people around them, having someone sit with them, that act of not sitting at home and experiencing this grief on your own or anything else, it was already so powerful for that to exist in a public space. So yes, existence is resistance. Public displays of sort of grief and affection are forms of resistance. And there can even be mental, personal, or values-based, but how we even show up and how we make those decisions, I think those are really forms of resistance that our communities are kind of showing up with and challenging as well.
I think those are some great points by both Kala and Nazia about resistance and how the dichotomy with that and just existing in itself. I think for myself, through the years of living life, one of the ways that I felt that was a way that I can practice my own resistance has always been art. I felt like art is a great form of resistance, and especially right now with the political political landscape and things going on around the world, I sometimes think, what can I do, and what part of my identities that I need to show up for and resist in certain ways. And I think Muslims in public space, one of the things that we do for sure is using art as a way to show resistance. And I'll quickly talk about a project that, I spoke about earlier about a basketball court that we wanted to have Islamic geometric shapes in Toronto in the Thorncliffe neighborhood. And when we first actually got started, we were actually trying really hard not to resist too much and actually work with the city, right? So my friends and I spent a lot of hours and time planning this really great Islamic geometric shape design, doing kind of and participating in kind of the traditional planning system, right? Emailing counselors, emailing planners, and saying, hey, I have a group of friends from this community, and we really want to look at beautifying this basketball court. And the reason why we chose a basketball court was because this was in 2022, and I think just a year or 2 years removed from, I think, COVID, right? So a lot of you folks remember a time where social distancing was such a big deal. And it was during that time, I remember it was a big deal in the newspapers, and Toronto Star was covering this, a practice by the city of Toronto of removing nets from basketball courts, right? And I think Naziat spoke about this earlier about the idea of loitering, right? How specific public spaces were kind of surveillanced or not necessarily public anymore. And for me, I took it deeply personal as somebody who loves basketball, somebody who grew up spending a lot of my time in the basketball court because I grew up in a vertical community, recognizing kind of the implications and the politics of why was that space policed? Why was that space surveillance? And I knew, like a lot of us know, that a lot of those spaces are sometimes surveillance and policed because it's mostly racialized people, Black people, brown people, a lot of Muslim people in these neighborhoods who kind of gather around those spaces. So when we wanted to do this basketball, when we wanted to do this kind of Islamic geometric shape, not only was it resisting it through a beautiful artistic Islamic geometric shape, but also resisting the idea that this is our space. We want to reclaim it. We don't give it up to the city to decide when we can or can't use it. That said, unfortunately, it was such a hurdle working with the city, right? And maybe there's a few folks who work for the city of Toronto here, and I'll say this kind of carefully at the same time. It was so difficult, right? A lot of red tape. It felt like to do this kind of basketball court that we kind of wanted to paint, I went from Parks and Recs to transportation. And an engineer asking me, okay, what type of acrylic paint are you going to use because we have to account for water runoff, right? And for me, it was such an interesting process because I said, somebody who has a background in planning, I went to school and studied planning. This is so difficult just to go through the planning process, resist and do some type of change. Forget me, if somebody, any everyday person, imagine the hurdles they have to face. Ultimately, the city of Toronto unfortunately said, no, they can't do this. And if we wanted to do this, this was going to cost, I think, they said around $80,000 because there's a lot of labor procurement type of laws and policies the city has, and the paint has to be applied by specific professionals, for example. And me and my friends were kind of looking at each other, kind of dumbfounded in the meeting saying, $80,000? Are you kidding me? We could paint this basketball court for a couple $100, right? But of course, that's part of this whole, I think, conversation about, urban activism and kind of guerrilla urbanism. And, I was super upset, and the city was like, hey, you know what? I asked them, hey, what if I end up painting this basketball court? Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And they said, you will get fined, sir. Like, we're going to fine you if you paint this basketball court, right? So I a bit still scared, obviously you want to do some resistance work and you want to do something, but at the same time, you're like, you don't want to get a fine and what type of implications that might have for your career. That said, end up still doing it. Did kind of a temporary chalk-based paint. But again, just to answer your question, I think art is certainly a way that I practice resistance.
And just to kind of quickly add on to what Mahdi was saying, like I think one of the things like what with what Mahdi was saying is essentially like, you know, art and these forms of existence, they're means of resistance as well. But I think sometimes we forget that public space isn't just a space of belonging. It's also a space of demonstration, a space of contestation, and a space of using symbols of resistance. And I think when these symbols are used, sometimes they can be overlooked. And then that's when the question comes up, like who belongs to the city and who doesn't, and which areas are policed and which areas aren't, which people are getting incarcerated and are not. And so I think these are just great ways of showing that symbols of resistance and symbols of them being in public space really lead to the idea of, well, who belongs here and who doesn't, and as well as advocating for them can get really difficult at times. So very important. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I will say for the participants, we do have a Q&A section. I feel like we didn't mention that, so I want to mention it now. And there is a Q&A box. And so once we arrive to the Q&A section, we'll ask the panelists all the questions they may have of interests, maybe just what they like in life, who knows. But kind of on to the next question about resistance a little bit. And everyone touched base on this a little bit, but maybe if anyone's interested to speak more on it, it's more about the barriers and what the hardest parts have been for advocating for something specific or a project or resistance overall. Yeah.
One of the barriers that I know we at Space for Grief really experienced was that it was kind of having to advocate for why this was necessary. A lot of people just for a very long time, Fran and Zion, when they started sort of talking about this idea, it was no one wants to talk about grief. Like it's a sad topic. We don't need to talk about it. And then COVID hit and everyone was talking about grief. And there was suddenly this collision of events that made this possible, that now people wanted to talk about grief, but then we experienced some resistance in that, okay, well, where would a space like this go? Because usually grief practices are either seen in religious communities or that you're a part of or cultural communities. But as we're losing some of those spaces, where is this supposed to go? So we actually, we approached the Toronto Public Library, one of the very, very few sort of non-denominational, sort of non-sectarian places that are available to anyone in the city. And we were one of the first art installations to be in the Toronto Reference Library. So being able to push for why something should exist and finding the right spaces and places and the people, because it takes so much organizing to really make that change. It takes that community, it takes that relationality. So to really be able to advocate for that, it took almost a year for us to even be able to get our first yes, or you know what, yeah, let's talk about grief. Let's create something that we'll talk about it, we'll educate about it, and we'll actually allow people to express it as well. Because even in the library, it's, well, are people going to be loud? Is there going to be, what's there going to be? There were restrictions, but being able to work within them and also to be able to still push and advocate for having that space was so, it takes a lot of resilience and stamina.
Yeah, that was very, very powerful. And I was just reflecting on how because it might seem very like abstract for people who might not understand, like, how do I grieve, or how do I grieve in public space? And I think this kind of relates to the question of everyone, like once you do it, but no one really sees behind the barriers that you actually face. And I think for all of us, whether it's at Space for Grief or even MIPS and Plaza Pops, it's like once people see it, they're like, oh wow, it's so amazing. Like, how did you? And then they're like, they don't know how hard it is to do this and the barriers you face. I think for us, particularly because we work with so many stakeholders, and the biggest barrier that we have is we're working on private land. We're working with private landowners. If they're not happy, we can't do anything, even if we have the city support, for instance. So I think one of the biggest hurdles for us has been working with the private landowners, and sometimes you have multiple plaza owners. So if like one person agrees, the other person might not agree. Sometimes you have two-story plaza. So it's a lot of technicalities that also come in. And another technicality, of course, comes in is our work with the city, where again, because many of these strip malls are so close to the sidewalk, we have to work with the city in terms of the city's right of way. And then there's height restrictions, and then there's you can do this or that. Or this year, for example, we had construction alongside Lawrence that was going to delay our installations for, I think, about almost like a month. But again, you have to work with another third party. And so when you have all of these elements together and bringing all of these people at the same time at the same table, it really does take a village to pop a plaza, as Daniel, our executive director, he always says, because we have so many people that are involved, working with the city, making sure that our designs and our installations are meeting the height requirements, working with the private landowners, and then working with the community, and showing that like, oh, like, what do you want to see at Plaza Pops? How do you want Plaza Pops to, how do you want Plaza Pops to do the work that they're doing? What do you want to see in our installations and programming? And I think like once you do it, then people really see the value of what you produce, but the hurdles behind it are really unseen. And I think they're very, very important things to speak about. And this year, I think one of the hurdles that we faced was not only the construction that was happening alongside Lawrence, but as well as, again, because we're working with the city and we love the city, they're one of our core partners, because the division of the city is so wide. If one part of the city, for example, they'll give us funding, they'll be like, okay, yeah, your project's approved. The zoning division of the city is like, yeah, you can't do that. You have no permit to take away private parking spaces. So navigating these areas and really like going through the weaves of it all has been one of the challenges we faced, but it's something that really is worth it. I say when we see the outcome of our spaces and we see the hard work that we establish, it's truly worth it. So yeah.
No barriers at all. I mean, who doesn't want an Islamic geometric shape in their public space? People are totally cool with that concept and idea. I joke because I think one of the barriers we certainly had was just explaining this concept to a lot of folks at the city, or community members who weren't aware. They didn't really understand what this meant, right? And obviously that's a big part of a lot of the misinformation that people have about Muslim people, about Islamic art perhaps. But at the same time, we take those opportunities of barriers and really trying to change people's perspective. So one of the work that we do a lot in the inner suburbs in Etobicoke, in Scarborough, is we do these really interesting sidewalk ballet projects where we get this Islamic geometric shape stencil, and we get a lot of folks to do this kind of chalk art therapy, I call it, where folks get the stencil and start making these shapes, right? And we try to let folks know at a high level, we're 100% not trying to convert anybody here, right? Like that's certainly not our goal, right? Our goal is really to get folks to understand that the people who live in these communities want to see their public spaces reflect them a bit more. So when they go to these spaces, they feel more safe. And I say that word safe with a lot of caution because, recognizing, as a Muslim person, how tough things were growing up sometimes, like how tough things were in a post 9/11 world. Going to public space was scary with a lot of tension. And I admire all of us because we do public space work so much and we understand the virtues of public space. We understand, Naziha and Callum brought up earlier about how wonderful it is that Toronto is such a multicultural city. But at the same time, I think it's so important to acknowledge that tensions do exist. Racism exists, discrimination exists, different practices of xenophobia have historically existed, and they've manifested themselves in the planning system in really real ways, right? One of the things that we had to look into this year was kind of some exclusionary zoning policy work. The province and the city was trying to look at the way, for example, the definition of general employment areas and if places of worship would kind of fall within those definitions or not. And the reason why this is important is because a lot of faith-based groups, particularly racialized faith-based groups, so not just mosques, a lot of Black churches, for example, they kind of exist in the city's peripheries. They exist in kind of the employment areas, right? Areas particularly a bit more affordable, to be honest, when it comes to rent. So that's why they can kind of have their gathering spaces there. And when the city kind of changes its policies of, okay, well, historically, yes, you're allowed to be here, but starting in 2022, 23, 24, we're going to change some of these uses. And in the future, somebody who is trying to have a place of worship in a general employment area, they may not be allowed. That, to me, is a very concrete example of exclusionary zoning. It is a very concrete example of a barrier that communities that we're talking about today kind of face. And our role has kind of been engaging with, obviously, mosque and other members of the community, and kind of making sure that they're well equipped and understand from an advocacy perspective, what can you do? And one of the things we've done is we've done a public deputation on this, right? And something I encourage everybody to kind of do is, if there's a planning issue, I know Nazia has done this with Plaza Pops and Daniel as well too, to engage our communities and making sure that we're at City Hall to kind of disrupt and making sure our voices are being heard.
Great. Thank you so much, the three of you. Very unique experiences in regards to resistance and the barriers. And kind of now switching gears a little bit, Alex will be talking about specific strategies, and we'll have questions for you on those. So Alex.
Yeah, you've kind of given a sneak peek, all of you, in different ways about how you're disrupting spaces. But for others who are looking to do similar work, what are some of these strategies? Can you share a bit more that have been really effective in advocating for more equitable public spaces, both, with the public, whether it be city officials, private partners, and these other kind of in-between parties? But yeah, any insights you can share?
For us, because it's a loaded question, Alex. It's like a very loaded question. It took me a long time to think about this. I think for us, in terms of things which have been effective, again, for both working with in public spaces and as well as with city officials, one of the things that we try to do is, like, as an organization, we obviously advocate for public space that is inclusive for everyone. And we see the city as a critical partner, but we also recognize that the work that we do is kind of outside perhaps the city's scope or even its mandate. And so what we do is, as that third party organization, we try to be able to align our personal goals along with the strategic goals, where we're able to align in that sense and work within that capacity, but also be outside of doing some of the work that the city does and push for advocating for those things, such as what Mahdi mentioned. I think it's been about a year now. For last year around the same time, it's been our 1-year anniversary since our zoning pilot got issued. And one of the reasons why I even got issued in the first place was because we really pushed for it with the city, and we worked with them, showing them that, hey, yes, you're giving us funding, we're so grateful, but you're also preventing us from doing this. And because of this zoning pilot project, it's not just only limited to Plaza Pops. Anyone can be able to take up a parking space within a privately owned plaza because of the city zoning pilot. So I think this is an example of how being able to aligning our goals with the city's strategic goals helps kind of make effective ways of creating change and having more equitable public spaces, and as well as working with them at the same time, because at the end of the day, our goal is the same, because the question always remains. And I think all of us in the work that we do is, who are you designing your city for, right? And once you have the same answer, which is the people that live here, you really know how to work together, and as well as work with each other in terms of creating and disrupting those spaces that need that sense of advocacy, that need that sense of change making happening. So I think that's one of the ways we tend to do it. Yeah.
I'd say something small but so important in the work we do. And aside from having a really good grant writer, for sure, that's a good tip and strategy. I think it's super important because a lot of us, we don't have institutional funding, and we require a lot of funding outside from external nonprofits or other bodies. I'd say allyship, I think Nazia kind of spoke about this, is super important. Like building those relationships and building those connections with different folks. What I found as a great positive in kind of the work we're doing at MIPS is, if the City of Toronto folks don't understand necessarily the work we're doing, it's the art folks who do. it's Arts Etobicoke, it's 880 Cities, it's Plaza Pops, it's Architects Association of Ontario, other folks who understand the work we're doing, right? And again, it might not be necessarily the mainstream planning process and the system itself, but there are other folks in the fringes who do understand that work and building those allyship, the allyship with them, right? And even the folks, you know, when we got started, it was me bugging my friends. Like the first ally has to be kind of your friends who you bug. So if you got an idea, you kind of have to bug them and be like, hey, you know, and for me, it was bugging my friend Igor, it was bugging my friend Linda, right? Who perhaps don't have the same understanding as I do of being a Muslim person and being in the city, but they have their own, I think, identity. They have their own background and history that they can relate that to. They face their own issues, much like we all do in our own ways, and they can see, okay, much like myself, maybe that person also is facing some type of issue that if we work together as a community, we can kind of further goals that we both feel that are aligned.
I completely agree with everything that Nizia and maybe have said, because it is, our partnerships have meant everything to us in Space for Grief, to be able to advocate for it, to be able to disseminate it, to even be able to get support and funding for it. Without those partners, we really wouldn't be able to have gotten where we are. And alongside partners, it's actually our volunteers. Our volunteers have been with us, some of them from the very beginning. And what bonds us together is our shared experience of grief and being able to feel like we're contributing to that. So finding that community, finding those people with the aligned values as you to actually not feel like you're doing it alone made such a big difference. But I will also say giving it enough time as well to work with this many stakeholders, to really be able to consider what it is that you're creating, what the impact of it is. A lot of the times we always have an idea of what that solution is, but there's so much that emerges that if we don't make time for that alignment, for that trust, for that emergence, we end up sort of creating the same things that don't necessarily always work. So along with time, there's also, I know at Space for Grief, we've thought about this and known that you can write as many reports as you want at times, and reports don't always change the world. So it's being more creative, like Nelly said, it's using art to talk about, to tell these stories, to make this change, to inspire that. We have also we've created sort of a system map to be able to go out to other forms of audiences to be able to talk about this work. And talking about it is really sort of the biggest hurdle and strategy that I will say has been what makes this possible, because even though we've done it, unless we talk about it and continue to make sure that it's top of mind, it's so quickly for other things to come in and make these efforts fade away. So be loud about it. Being loud about it is so, so important.
Yeah. And going back to, I mean, at its core, your projects are all heavily design based. We're talking about public space, we're talking about visuals. I see in the chat, people are asking to see photos of all the great work you're doing. So I want to drill down into that aspect actually of the design. So how do you actually design for care, for emotion, for community, for safety, beyond just the physical access? I know, Kala, you mentioned something about adding in nature in different ways and how that responds to different senses. So I'd love to learn more.
For sure. So one tenet that we've always designed for Space for Grief is activate all the senses. Activates not just sight, but smell, sound, texture as well. So Zayan Hussain, who's one of the co-founders, is also a composer and musician. He created this wonderful score for Space for Grief that plays throughout the space. We've also incorporated sort of natural elements to bring in a level of greenery, a connection with nature. We brought in sort of the smell of soil to bring people back to those memories as well. And then the way that we actually bring in information, we design it so that you kind of get some information about grief. You're able to sort of not think about yourself personally, but think about sort of others through our Museum of Grief, which showcases sort of different objects that might carry different types of grief, such as employment grief or gold medal grief, where a lot of people who are in sports, if you've achieved something, what happens after you achieve that? So even talking about how grief shows up in different cultures, a few mentions of different cultures already tells people that they're welcome here as well and they're seen. So how we prepare people mentally, physically, and then to be able to engage spiritually, I think that's one way that we really design for that care. It's how do you scaffold people into a space where they feel and can sense that safety, that care, that they're welcome.
That was profound. That was amazing. I was just nodding my head because I'm agreeing with everything you guys say. If I'm nodding too much, it's because I'm deep in thought. It was just amazing what you mentioned, Kala, just this ability of creating a sense of scaffolding where people feel welcomed within that space through culture, through ethnicity, through belonging. And I think just being able to meet people where they are, I think is the biggest form of engagement that can be done beyond just physical access. And I think when it comes to design, and again, you mentioned having plants, having been connected to nature. I think just for us, the biggest challenge was, well, we're in this giant slab of concrete and cars and sounds. How do we make people feel like I can sit here and relax? And I think for us, one of the things this year we were very intentional about with our design, all of the work that we do is with modular furniture, so they can be changed and moved around. And for us, our director of research and one of our co-founders, Brendan Stewart, shout out Brendan. I don't know if you're listening, but shout out Brendan. He was in charge of bringing in, and Daniel as well, just bringing in local plants and being able to sense that, being able to create that sense of nurturing nature, where we want to be able to include and as well as promote like cross-pollination and have new plants that people can connect to. And we have so many butterflies and native plants that are related to Scarborough, and as well as like when you're in concrete, you don't see green space. So including plants and connecting with nature. And I think one of the biggest things about making people feel at home is through the actual design itself. And I think one of the things we were able to do was, well, what do people in Scarborough resonate with? We have such strong immigrant communities. What do they resonate with? And so we had universal design that when people would see it, they would just stop and look at it. So we had our tuk-tuk, for example, which is like a small motorized vehicle used for active transportation. And micromobility in cities across the global south. And so everyone would just stop and look at it like, whoa. And one of the other things that we were able to do was the use of colors and patterns and texture. Like people love bright colored things and it attracts them. And I think one of the biggest things we did this year was in collaboration with Muslims in Public Space, working with Mahdi and as well as another local artist, Noor Khan, where we wanted to create symbols that attracted people to the space. Majority of the people that live in Wexford Heights are Muslim, that come from Muslim immigrant communities and speak multiple languages. So we wanted to include signage in multiple languages and as well as Islamic designs and geometric shapes that people would just look and like, whoa, like that reminds me of back home. I can't believe this is here. So we had multiple colored shapes and different designs, which Mahdi will talk about because he's the expert on those. But we had different signage which said salam in multiple languages, including Urdu, including Arabic, including English. And we had different fonts that represented like an Arabic style font, but it was also like legible and people would walk by it and they would just want to sit under it. And we had shade, especially that was one of the challenges, especially when you're in a slab of concrete in the summer, it gets hot. And creating these small little symbols within our design process and beyond just physical access of the space, but meeting people where they are, having the sense of community engagement where you're not only just doing something for the sake of doing it in public space, but really who are you doing it for? And I think one of the other things we were able to do beyond just our design is our programming and having events that people relate to one another. And every time people would walk by, because we're right next to the sidewalk, it's like creating that sense where people don't have to question, hey, is this space free? Because that was one of the questions we would always get. Is this space free? I'm like, yes, it's for everyone. And kind of going back to what Kelly mentioned about like having signage that welcomes and then shows that like this is for you, this is for any and everyone to come and sit and relax. So I think being very intentional about design and working with the people that live there to create something that is just beyond physical access that generates that sense of belonging, as we talked about in the beginning, is very important.
Now I'm not along to everything that you just said.
I think something that I'll add here to the conversation is we did a project on Islamic gardens over the past 2 years, a free exhibit kind of exploring kind of influence of Muslim communities historically when it comes to landscape urbanism and kind of landscape architecture. And the reason why we did this is because there's a growing need of food equity issues in Toronto. There's a growing need of access to gardens. And a lot of folks have interest in creating gardens. And one of the ways that we wanted to ensure that a lot of Muslim people who participate with their local communities and kind of designing gardens is looking at historically how have gardens been designed in Muslim communities, right? And what we found was kind of a lot of folks looking at historical ideas of maybe the Mughal Empire in Southeast Asia, maybe the Safavid Empire in Iran, of how gardens were designed very specifically with this great symmetry, this idea of water going through green spaces and luscious green spaces and having a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables within those spaces that have been part of the kind of historical architecture and design in Muslim communities. And for us, it was, okay, how can we kind of replicate this and bring it here? The importance of bringing it here is because people will take an ownership of within their own communities of being participants and active partners in any local initiative that they have, right? So our exhibit was teaching folks kind of the principles and ideas behind Islamic gardens and how historically the information about that. But we also left it open too, where we let folks reimagine what does an Islamic garden in Toronto look like today. And luckily, we had the opportunity to actually build that out with Naziha, Daniel, Brendan, with Plaza Pops and other folks of what does an Islamic garden design look within the urban context of a suburban parking space that has more parking than it needs to have. So to get there, for sure, is a lot of workshops and doing a lot of community events, a very iterative process of, going back and forth and learning design concepts and kind of working together. That part of it, though, I say is the best part. I think what we all would agree here is that, it's not necessarily the end result you get with our different projects, whether it's Spaces for Grief or Plaza Pops, the beautiful physical things that manifest at the end of the day. It's actually the process and the journey to get there that is so rewarding. It's the back and forth of, oh, this is such a great idea, but let's add this too. And it's a mix of ideas coming together collaboratively that makes the end result so joyous.
Thank you. That was like a short masterclass on inclusive design. So there's a lot more to unpack there for sure. But we want to open it up actually to the chat because it's been popping off throughout this entire conversation. So we want to give everyone else a chance to answer whatever's burning questions are happening. So I see a few in the chat already. Again, if you have any other thoughts or questions, please add them in there and we'll pass them on to the panelists for the time we have left. But starting off with the first question I see here, which is about what says, given the gaps and obstacles with city policy, bylaws and cultural differences / practices, so the different ways of grieving and expressing resilience, how can public space design be more attentive to intersectional forms of belonging, especially for communities whose identities cross lines of race, migration, faith, queerness, and indigeneity? There's a lot.
My first reaction to that question is we need some type of plan. The city of Toronto needs some type of plan, to be honest. And I say this, we have official plans. We have plans that talk about different sizes of buildings. We have plans to talk about different commercial districts. And we certainly do have a lot of cultural plans as well that are perhaps more broad. But I do think we need a public space plan. I really think we need a public space plan that is inclusive of the different communities, that ensures that these community members are part of the process. And I think that way, at least we have something to kind of at large hold ourselves a little accountable to. But I do think that'd be kind of interesting to see some type of public space strategy or plan at the City of Toronto.
Yeah, I think just going off of what Mahdi mentioned, the importance and the need of a plan and being able to work within what we have. Because I think one of the things that I always think about is the question I always come back to. Like at the end of the day, we have all of these things for the people that live in the city, and so many of us come from such intersectional backgrounds. I know we have the city's cultural plan, which again is a great start off to being able to support artists and other cultural events throughout the city. But I think we have to go a bit deeper than that. And as well as, again, these artists, again, I believe sometimes we're always in this downtown focus, which again is important. And we do see the need for that, especially with mixed use development and on all the projects that are happening, but expanding beyond those who live, especially within the suburbs, through, for example, grants like the Cafe Tio Dining District Grant. Again, Cafe Tio is something that popped off during COVID and again, everywhere around cafes in downtown. But in terms of events that are related to the Cafe Tio Dining District program, how many do we see for people that come from such intersectional backgrounds? And I think one of the things one of the examples that I can think of that we were lucky enough to do in collaboration with the city through the Dining District Grant was being able to create an event that everybody can come to. And this was one of our biggest events that we held in Plaza Pops, and it's called it's called Adhaba. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but Adhaba is basically a roadside informal eatery, and it's kind of found in like the nestled along highways alongside Southeast Asia, in India, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. And what's really interesting, the idea and this concept of Adhaba is you would drive along the highway and think of like an en route, but with better food. That's what I always tell people, with great food, you can relax, and there's like these little benches, and you can just recline on them, sit and eat, drink your chai, and then go off along your day. And this is something that is central and is something that's globalized, like for example, but that doesn't necessarily mean like Adhaba in India is not the same as Adhaba in Bangladesh, or neither is Adhaba in Morocco the same as the one in East Africa or anywhere else, right? So they have different names, but the concept is the same. The sense of like you're driving by, you just want to chill, relax, and then move on. And one of the things we wanted to do at Plaza Pops was, well, we have such a wide community. Yes, we have a strong Muslim community, but they're all from different backgrounds. If we look at our plazas in and of itself, we have a Somali restaurant, one of the best Somali restaurants ever, Sahan, shout out, next to a Pakistani restaurant, next to a Lebanese like grocery shop that just opened up. They're all different cultures, but when we brought this programming to them, and we wanted to create a dhaba, and we wanted to create one in partnership with our local business partners, so many people came out. And one of the things that we found from our research that we do alongside our partnership with the University of Guelph, which our director of design, Brendan, handles, when we've done research from the ethnography studies that we created as a result of that programming, so many people came and they felt like, oh, I feel like this is in Morocco. Somebody came, oh, I feel like I'm in like northern Kashmir with my friends. I feel like I'm back home in Bangladesh. Like, this is so cool. And to be able to create programming like that, that is multicultural and bring so many people together, and intentionality in terms of resonating with people are where people come from, and those who have such intersectional backgrounds, and keeping that in mind, and doing these programming, doing these plans, doing these, what Mahdi mentioned, a public space plan with in line what a multicultural city would look like, is something amazing.
Hey, you guys are meeting Jason on Sunday, right? You got to pitch it to him next Sunday, right? Like while we're walking, that hey, just slide PDF file into his hand, be like, hey, we need a public space strategy at the city.
We're gonna do that. We're gonna talk to Jason about that. But yeah, absolutely what you mentioned, Mahdi, and I think it's so important. And I think this is a great way of being inclusive and including programming and official policies that bring together and plan for intersectional communities. I was speaking for so long. I'm sorry, guys.
No, that was great. I know that City of Toronto, they have committed to at least doing like a public market strategy. So it's right in line with the TABA, where it's like, if we can talk about how our public markets work, and that's as like a central public space, like that is I think maybe a really nice opportunity to slide that in there. But for Space for Grief, I know that there's one activity that's actually central to the space, and it's actually, we have these laser cut birds that people write messages of grief on, and then they all kind of go up into this area where you can read everybody's messages. And that's always been a central part of our installation, because it's the one place you can go where people feel like they can leave their mark, leave a bit of their identity, leave
Mhm.
something of their own, while also seeing everyone else's shared humanity. And I've literally stood in that room and read messages for hours, because you suddenly be able to see that regardless of these different sort of lines that we draw and these sort of the ones and zeros, that the dichotomies that we have, there's still something that we all share and can feel together. And from that, it actually has been so powerful. We've seen sort of intergenerational conversations, intercultural conversations about grief, to be able to connect over a shared humanity. And
That's true.
that has been such a unique experience to watch and witness every single time.
I admire that a lot. Like I've been to a few of your events, and I'll just say this: great. And when in a city like Toronto, you need spaces for grief. Like you need those spaces like that, and you need the work that's being done here. Because you're right, we beyond all the lines that are drawn, dichotomies as you mentioned, like there's a shared identity here that's really important, and shared experiences that people feel, right? And yeah,
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And so another question from the chat is, does the city employ a set standard of metrics and feedback systems to measure how public spaces impact, build, or transform communities? If any of you know.
so
I'll
sorry,
answer
Alex,
that.
can you ask
No.
that again? Can you ask that again? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It says, does the city employ a standard set of metrics
Okay.
and a feedback system to measure how public spaces impact, build, or transform communities?
That's a good question. I know for the city's pop spaces, that's something that perhaps they're working on. I don't think they do have it though. I don't
They
know.
don't have a comprehensive system, no.
Yeah, they don't, right? That's what I was
No,
thinking.
no.
I think it's
Yeah.
mostly like nonprofits or other folks like Park People, to be honest, does a great job. And I know Wes from Park People has spoken about this a lot as well too, is when we even have these kind of privately accessible public spaces, the POPs, privately owned public spaces, sorry. How are they successful? Right? And we don't necessarily have a concrete way of figuring that out. We should.
And if they do have a system available, it's not accessible. Like, yeah,
It's not publicly accessible.
yeah, I've been on
There
the
you
city's
go.
website enough to know if they have a system like that. They do share data, and sometimes they do report the community's not happy on this
Yeah.
thing, but it's not a structured system, right? Sorry, I'm not even a panelist, but here I am. Anyways.
No, that was great. I think it's a yes, Sammy, you're right. There is that. But one of the things, though, I think we do need to have a standardized metric. Again, we don't have one, and like what you've all mentioned, there's either studies or some things that are either just as a result of a project that the city's related to. I think for one of the things for us that we were lucky enough to work with the city for is a report called the city's Plaza POV report, where they particularly look at, it's kind of like an ongoing study looking at like commercial strip plazas or like the strip malls where we're particularly operating in, to understand like how they serve local communities, how they contribute to the city's economy. And as a result of that report, there's now emerging trends of like, what do plazas mean? What is a plaza? And so we're lucky in that sense that we get to work with them, and we're leading the walk with the city's Plaza POV team as well. But again, there isn't anything standardized across the board, which I think is very, very important, and we need that.
Great. So it sounds like we have the tools in hand and the people to make it happen. Exciting. Okay, so another question, and this is directed to Kala, and I see you're typing, so I see you've seen it already, but for the sake of the audio, people are asking, where can they see the grief Spaces for Grief installation now?
So right now we are in our planning phase, so figuring out what 2025 looks like. We do have a couple that are in the works, but nothing confirmed just yet. So stay tuned, that's coming soon. But generally, we've been a part of Evergreen Brickworks Good Morning Festival that happens in November. And if you haven't gone to check it out, one, go to Evergreen Brickworks. They are a wonderful public space that I think is doing so much, including skateboarding. So Ariel, if you are interested, that is definitely a place to check out how they're incorporating skateboarding into a public space. But yeah, so that'll be sort of coming up. But the festival itself, again, it brings in sort of a multicultural, environmental, and social look at grief and dying and mourning. And it's definitely something worth checking out in November, as well as their farmers market, another great public market strategy there. Yeah.
Sure. And their scones. If you've ever been to Evergreen Brickworks, they have great blueberry scones. Yeah, classic. Okay, so another question here is, have you ever come across or thought specifically about how skateboarders in your communities may experience your projects? Skaters have intimate relationships with shared spaces, intense interest in changes in elevation, slope, materials, not to mention are versed in valuing spaces for utility over commerce, which is great for jamming dominant culture. Have you ever thought to include skateboarders in your analyses and work?
I mean, I really wish we did. That's something so new because it's such a profound comment. Thank you for whoever asked it. I don't have the chat open, so I can't see your name, but thank you so much. It's such an insightful question. Again, I think with because we work in like strip mall parking lots, it's hard to think of that. But what's so interesting is we see so many people skateboarding in anywhere else other than skateboard parks because we don't have access to skateboard parks. I think what's really cool is one of the projects that we're trying to work towards, where I think it would be possible to keep this in mind, is currently in partnership with 880 Cities, a project called Tower Pops, where they're currently looking at tower renewal and how it affects public health and healthy communities and creating spaces for those communities. And we're lucky to be advisors for that project in partnership with 880 Cities and have MIPS on board. I'd love that we get to collaborate with MIPS with everything. And you know, one of the things is that one of the parking lots we have, they're in two sites, one in Cooksville and one in a smaller neighborhood within a tower community itself in Rockcliffe Smythe. One of the parking lots that we have is giant, like it's huge, and it's an abandoned decommissioned parking lot. So I think that what you said about creating space for skateboard users, and during one of the community engagement sessions, one of the things that came up was we want a skateboard park, was we want to hang out here, we want basketball courts, we want sports. So I think that is a great example, and I hope that is one thing that could be established in creating such communities for skaters. And I want to learn how to skate too. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting skateboarding work. Have you ever heard of Surf Ghana in the city of Accra in Ghana, in Africa? They have a lot of really strong skate collective, and they're disrupting space in their own ways, actually. So for the person who asked that question, I encourage you to look at some of their policies and practices as well.
I'm also reading some comments from the chat. I know Al wrote this. Lots of art installation and wayfinding, placemaking, and placekeeping opportunities along the Northwest Cultural Trail and Allen Greenway, which I'll put a link for us here, which looks pretty cool. Thanks for that comment, Al. Al, I will say, I think what we're all spearheading towards is a public space strategy. I think that's what I'm getting out of this conversation is we're going to push for a public space strategy. But I appreciate you sending this information.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it in terms of of questions from the chat. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for having us, Sammy and myself from Untitled Planning, to have this lovely conversation and maybe be part of the next public space, or the first public space strategy in the city. So I'm going to pass it off to Sarah to close us off and take us to the end of this session.
Amazing. Thank you so much. There were lots of really great insights and perspectives here. I love the concept of culture jamming and thinking about the way that senses make a difference in the way that we build and design and explore our spaces, and not necessarily just like visual senses, but also, you know, smell. The discussion about food was amazing. I have roots in Morocco, so I was really excited to hear you talk about that and sort of yeah, there's a really strong nostalgia can be a really, really strong feeling. The sense of belonging, of being home, and food is a really great way of doing that. So thank you, everybody. Really, really great perspectives, really great ideas here. I just wanted to say thank you to Sammy and Alex for being our amazing moderators and being really thoughtful and yes, a round of applause and sort of guiding folks through the questions. Thank you to our participants and attendees for all your really great questions and your ideas. And thank you to our amazing panelists, like incredible job. Thank you so much for taking the time out on a Saturday afternoon to hang out with us. For everyone else, I just wanted to remind folks that we have an incredible list of events that are happening as part of Jane's Walk Festival. So tomorrow we have another panel that's all about reimagining suburban parking spaces. So if you were really, really interested in the Plaza Pops conversation that we had today and what it means to take those public spaces and those strip malls and really just really dive deep into what that means. And we have a whole panel about that. So that's tomorrow at 12. That will be online. We're also hosting a film on Monday. If you're in Toronto and if you're close to the downtown area, we will be hosting a film screening of Citizen Jane, Battle for the City, which is all about activism and urban change. And we would love to have folks there. And then also, I'm going to throw this up for folks that just need a little bit more. Please take some time out and visit our Jane's Walk website. We've got an events page where you can kind of see everything that we're planning. We have our walk list, which is updated, and we are at about 149 walks. So lots to do this next weekend if you're looking for opportunities to kind of get out and explore and engage more thoughtfully and intentionally with the conversation. So please take a look at our website. Please come out to our walks. Please tune in to our panel tomorrow. And I believe that wraps us all up for today. So thank you everyone for coming out, and thank you attendees, thank you panelists, thank you hosts. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.